I wanted to start this episode off with a Void Hunter build, but honestly I'm just not feeling any of the Void Hunter builds I've come up with so far. I don't like the new aspect, Wisdom Vest still isn't good enough, and neither is Spectral Blades, but Arc is still very strong. Ascension got some buffs, Tempest Strike got some buffs, and we have the whole new Bolt Charge system so that we can do even more damage. So today we're going to use Gifted Conviction and become an extremely tanky Arc Hunter. We're getting this from Amplified's new damage resistance of 15%. We are stacking on top of that Spark of Resistance. We're also going to put in there the Gifted Conviction damage reduction bonus. And just from those few, we get a total damage resistance of up to 68%, which is crazy. This is going to be really good in the new Nether activity, where there's more damage, there's less healing, so that you just are taking less damage and you're losing that health slower, so you can work on regaining it. We also have great crowd control in here. We've got a lot of blind. It does some pretty solid damage. And we're just making bolt charges left and right. And on top of it, you still have really great Arc supers in either Arc Staff or Gathering Storm. If that sounds good to you, let's get into it. I'm Engineer. As I've done with recent videos, I just want to do an overview of the build. So the goal here is to spam our abilities as much as possible, which keeps our damage reduction high and will jolt enemies and give our allies amplified. In general, this is a general add clear build built for survival, AoE damage, and some team support. It's going to fall off a little bit with boss encounters just because it doesn't have a whole lot of single target damage. Content level I've tested up to is 20 power level under, pretty standard. Can't really test in GMs right now, but it'd probably do pretty well there, but you'd have to coordinate with your team. Pros of this, you have a lot of stacked damage resistance. As I mentioned, you have Amplified for 15%, Spark of Resistance for 25%, Gifted Conviction, which scales based on how much jolt you apply, to 50%, and those total multiplicatively, which I've explained in another video, and I can point you to a resource on that, but that's 68% damage reduction. The cons, as with most Arc subclasses, it has low healing. Your healing is pretty much entirely dependent on picking up orbs. If you want to do high single target damage, you're going to rely on your super or your weapons. These abilities are not great for single target. It's played pretty up close because that's how you activate the Gifted Conviction buff. It's generally just not the best for bossing, so keep that in mind. But for seasonal activities or dungeon encounters without bosses, this is going to be really, really strong. Let's talk about the exotic that we're using here today, and it is Gifted Conviction. This was added with the final shape, and whenever you use Ascension or Tempest Strike, it releases 3 tracking arc projectiles, that little arc bombs that go out and they inflict jolt. Really great. One of the biggest parts though is if you inflict jolt to any enemies within 15 meters, you get damage resist. It stacks up to 4 times, but really there's only 3 levels of it: 25%, 40%, and 50%. It's really good. It gives you some damage, gives you some more jolt, and gives you a lot of damage resistance. And you can get this from also inflicting jolt with your weapons or your abilities like Ascension. Because this was added with final shape, the only way to get it if you don't have it yet is Rahul's Novel Decryption, and that requires you to fully reset his reputation. If you haven't done that, I have a video on that. You should check it out. For your stat priorities, we always want resilience, we always want discipline. Recovery and mobility are both important. We want with these a bit of mobility for this build to keep the ability loop going, and then a little bit of intellect, and you really don't need strength because of the mobility. We'll be using Gambler's Dodge for most of our melee region. On our aspects and abilities, we're going to use Ascension, which is a great aspect, recently buffed. Now it works with Gambler's Dodge, so if you use it near an enemy, you get your melee back, and it has 3 fragment slots. If you haven't used this ability before, you do a little twirl, you give Amplified to the user and any allies nearby, and you also deal some damage and jolt all those enemies that are nearby as well. It's really strong, and you can get it on a very low cooldown, so that's great to work with. Now our second aspect is one that I've actually never put into a build before, and that's Tempest Strike. So they buffed the damage of this pretty considerably this episode, and this will give bolt charge on any jolted enemy kills. It does not have to be with the ability, contrary to what the Destiny Data Compendium says in this little snip here. Anytime you get a jolted enemy kill, you'll get bolt charge, which is awesome. On your super, you can use Gathering Storm or Arc Staff. You could even use Storm's Edge, but it has the longest cooldown of all supers in the game, and that's just kind of rough. I've been using Flashbang Grenade because it has the shortest cooldown for Arc, and it blinds enemies, has an 87.5% flat gain factor. Now for the melee, you don't actually use the melee itself. So you want Combination Blow. It is the fastest cooldown melee ability in the game. It has 100% flat gain factor, so that you can constantly get that back. We will still mostly get it from Gambler's Dodge, but it's still great to keep that cooldown low if you need to restart the loop. And as I mentioned, we're using Gambler's Dodge because that gets our melee return. So, talk about our fragments. We want to take Spark of Resistance. It's 25% damage resistance when surrounded by enemies. We're trying to stack as much damage resistance as we can, and that's just really strong. We want to take Amplitude to generate orbs when we get rapid kills while amplified. Those orbs are our biggest source of healing, so it's just kind of important. Spark of Beacons is where we get some crowd control. You might be able to drop this in easier content where you don't need it, but it really helps control enemies in between your ability spam, so I found it very useful. Spark of Discharge will generate ionic traces on weapon kills, but most important thing is it will also give you a bolt charge every time you collect an ionic trace. Lastly, but not least, Frequency will give you an extra stack of bolt charge anytime you gain bolt charge, which is really great because you're basically stacking that up almost twice as fast in most cases. It will also give you some reload buffs whenever you secure a melee hit, which we do pretty frequently. The one alternate I have here is Spark of Ions, which will give you ionic traces on jolted kills, but it does have a 10-second cooldown. And included in this, you also can generate an ionic trace if you kill an enemy with bolt charge, but that is included in the same cooldown. So another way to get ionic traces, I would love to have this and discharge, but I just want all these other fragments too much. Moving over to mods and armor stats, we're generally building for our class ability as much as possible. That is kind of what our whole loot works around. On top of that, we want to make as many orbs as we can, and we want to make as many orbs and super energy as we can, and we're going to do that primarily with our melee ability, because that has the best AoE and does damage, and there's nothing really similar for class abilities other than Dynamo, which is just using your class ability near enemies, but the returns are pretty small. We're still going to run it because we do it a lot, but just keep in mind. A big note here is that Ascension does not proc any class ability mods. It will use Utility Kickstarts because it's consuming the charge, but things like Outreach or Powerful Attraction or Reaper, not effective at all. I've actually seen several build crafters making builds with Ascension, and it doesn't work. So hope people figure that out, but important to know. Also, this is probably obvious, but you need recuperation on the legs because that's how you make orbs heal you. Very important. On our armor stats, boost resilience as much as possible for more damage resistance. Try and get mobility to 50. Amplified gives another 50 mobility, so that's all you need for maximum class ability return. You want to get as much discipline as you can for grenades. We don't really need much strength because we're going to get it from Gambler's Dodge. And just get as much recovery as you can in there. And as always, intellect goes to 30. For artifact mods, these aren't super critical, and once again, if you see my last video, I don't have most of these unlocked. I'm behind because I was out of town for a bit this week, but want to take the arc-centric perks, things like Dielectric, which will give us bolt charge when we kill arc debuffed enemies. It's really good, we do that a lot. That boost is going to be really effective on Gifted Conviction because we'll make extra orbs of power. Flashover will give you amplified when you get max bolt charge, which we usually do, but it also makes the bolt charge discharge stronger. Defibrillating Blast will give you bolt charge when you stun a champion, but the more important thing is that bolt charge now jolts, which is going to be a crazy loop for this. I get to that. Lastly, in column 5 is Particle Reconstruction, which will increase the damage a boss or large enemy takes from linear fusion rifles after multiple hits, and that's just extremely good for damage. Makes linear fusions very strong in this episode. We'll talk about that in weapons. None of these are super required, but they can elevate it just a little bit. Speaking of weapons, we are, like most arc builds I do with Spark of Beacons, we want an arc special, but we want something that jolts so that we can proc Gifted Conviction and the Tempest Strike secondary benefit. Get bolt charge and get the resistance up constantly. My favorite is Indebted Kindness. You get it from Warlord's Ruin. If you complete it once, you can go get a free roll from Banshee. Very good, quick reload. Even with the nerfs to rocket sidearms, still very strong. You can also take shotguns like Prophet of Doom from Garden of Salvation or Found Verdict from Vaulted Glass, recently reprised. Iterative Loop from Neomuna is very solid. It does have Volt Shot on it, so you can get that. And then another addition is Edge of Concurrence, the Hunter exclusive Arc Glaive. This just got jolting feedback this episode and the Arc Blast jolts. So this is really, really strong. The only downside of this is you're going to have to switch off of that glaive so you can use your melee ability, and that can get a little annoying, but really recommend this. On heavy weapons, linear fusion rifles are going to be very strong this episode, but we have lots of great options. If you have an exotic slot free, Queensbreaker is going to be absolutely ridiculous. It got buffed a ton. You can switch between firing modes. Does great damage. In the shorter range fire mode, it blinds on hit for more like add encounters. If you have somebody at range that's giving you trouble, it's just really good. Can't recommend it enough. Now, let's get into the gameplay. This is, once again, the opening Tomb of Elders. This has been increased in power since the episode started, so I'm somewhere between like 13 to 15 power level under. It says it's 2030 activity now. So, but it's just kind of frantic, lots of enemies. You can see the little red sword, so the enemies are definitely a bit challenging. Once again, just use those abilities when they're up, and then use your special in between. Your class ability should come up pretty quickly thanks to Amplified. And then you just want to scatter that out to as many enemies as possible. But the Jolt grenades will actually give you a little bit more range on Ascension. You can see I'm actually bringing out Queensbreaker here just to finish off some stronger enemies. It's really good for that. Accidentally did a normal combo blow punch here, but that's fine. One thing to note with Bolt Charge, it builds it pretty fast. If you want to discharge it and you don't have an ability ready, or you just want to target it better, a normal melee punch will drop the Bolt Charge discharge on enemies. That's a really effective way to control it, because otherwise it tends to kind of go wild and hit a random enemy that you hit. See here, we're just generally hanging around above half-life. Every so often we fight something hard. Tempest Strike just took out that yellow bar enemy there. It's surprisingly good. It's not consecration level good. Probably no ability probably should be, but it is a lot more effective this episode. So again, just clearing enemies. We got our super pretty fast. We're using Gathering Storm. If you use Arc Staff, you'll get it back even faster because of the active regen benefits for roaming supers, so that might be better in some content, but I just really like Gathering Storm, especially for bosses. You can see here there's a new Bane enemy that you have to punch in order to break their shield, which is kind of cool. But you're seeing these enemies stumble around a lot, and it's just because of all the blind. Blind's very, very strong, and I'm glad it's finally getting some attention with Arc now. Bolt Charge, take out that enemy. One of the hardest things with this build is you can't see all your buffs because we only can see 4 at a time. And one of them is Armor Charge. So we have a lot of abilities and just we're all over the place. Putting some Jolt on the boss. We hit the boss with the super earlier. This one's pretty tanky. I think it's just exclusively this Abomination boss for this mode, but got about half health and we're just wearing him down with Queensbreaker's 3-bolt burst. That's kind of the long range attack, but it's the main thing for damage and really strong. You can see we just constantly heal too, so it's great. That's it. Just to summarize that gameplay loop, try and use your melee ability first because you want to use Ascension after when the melee is on cooldown near enemies so you regain that melee. Then you're going to Jolt and gain Amplified and just keep the loop going. If your abilities are down, use your Arc Special for Blind and Jolt and just keep repeating that. You can use your super for whatever makes sense for you. That's pretty much all I've got for today. I'm just bringing up the build review if you want to refer to it. Just kind of think about what the build's good for. Hope you've enjoyed that. I've really appreciated all the new support and subscribers on the last video. Once again, getting very close to 1,000 subscribers, so that's a great benchmark for just a few months doing this. I have a lot of builds coming. Definitely be hopping into the dungeon later today, so hopefully that's great. And with that, I'll let you go. Thanks. Have a good one.